This video contains mature subject matters including graphic violence, death, and assault. This video is not intended for anyone under 18 years of age.
He witnessed his mom get stuck in the sofa, and he talked about this with Dr. Ramsland. Her ring got caught in the sofa somehow, and she was terrified by being stuck, yelling for help. This was a moment that he felt arousal.
You're watching House of Crime Podcast.
In the first episode of this series, we discussed the murders of members of the Otero family, which included Joseph, Julie, Josephine, and Joey, along with the murders of Catherine Bright, Shirley Vian, Nancy Jo Fox, Maureen Hedge, Vicki Lynn Wagerly, and Dolores Davis. These murders took place from 1974 to 1991 in the towns of Wichita and Park City, Kansas. We highly recommend that if you haven't watched or listened to the first episode, that you go back and listen to that episode first before listening to this one. Otherwise, you're just going to have a lot of holes in the information.
Yeah, exactly.
And in this episode, we're going to discuss how the police narrowed in on the suspect. The 30th anniversary of the Otero murders happened on January 15th, 2004, and it was getting a lot of media attention. Believing there should be more attention on him than the victims, the killer once again sent messages to the Wichita Eagle. He sent copies of Vicki Wagerly's driver's license and crime scene photos that could only have come from the killer, as crime scene investigators did not take photos of this specific scene due to the victim still being alive at the time. KAKE-TV also received correspondence which was swiftly given to the police. An additional letter was found inside another engineering book in the Wichita Public Library. This letter contains specifics regarding the 1974 Otero murders. On December 8, 2004, a white plastic bag wrapped in rubber bands was found in Murdoch Park. The plastic bag contained the driver's license for Nancy Jo Fox, along with some other information. This was the anniversary of the death of Nancy Fox. BTK attempted correspondence several times throughout 2005 with the Wichita Eagle, KAKE-TV, by leaving letters at the public library and leaving various clues throughout the city. Some packages were left that contained jewelry, possibly belonging to the victims. Some packages were cereal boxes. He thought it was so clever to use a cereal box because he was proud to be a serial killer. Postcards were sometimes sent. There were also dolls made to look like victims.
That's unhinged.
Yeah.
I can picture this man making little dolls. He's got children at this point.
One of the dolls was of the daughter, the Otero daughter.
And so he's making these dolls. Do his family see these dolls that he's making? They're wondering, where are these dolls going?
I mean, we're going to talk about this later, but he had hidey holes all over his house.
Yeah, he
like
did.
Little hiding places all over the place.
Yeah. He likes his mementos.
Yeah, really, a lot. During the entire time, BTK sent a total of 19 messages. 10 of those messages were sent in the last year of his freedom. He then left a cereal box in a truck outside the Home Depot. There was a note inside the box that asked if the police would be able to trace him if he sent them a floppy disk. The police responded via an ad in the newspaper, quote, "Rex, it'll be okay," unquote.
And question, why did they call him Rex?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm wondering if Rex was on the cereal box in some way. I'm not really sure.
It would be nice if they could show us every piece of evidence.
I would love. I mean, it's been
there's so many holes. It's been 50 years.
50 years since the first murders. Yeah. I mean, hello, can we have all the evidence already? I would love. Yeah. There's a lot of things I would like to see that's just not available.
Kansas has done a great deal of effort to stop us from being able to get all of this information.
The state of Kansas.
The state of Kansas.
The cruel killer never thought the police would lie to him. Finally, the killer sent a floppy disk to a local TV station that was traced to a computer at his church. The metadata in the disk linked it to Christ Lutheran Church and to an employee named Dennis.
Cheers. He is so dumb. I wonder why he sent 10 in the last year he was caught and only 9 over the course of like 30 years. Mm-hmm. I guess, 25 years that he had been murdering? And
Yes.
so he just, in the last 1 year, he decided, I'm throwing it all out there. He really needed the attention. He really needed them to know he's not dead. He's not in prison.
Yeah.
He is still stalking. He is still at large.
Yeah.
Don't
forget about me.
Yeah, he was just a little busy.
Well, in previous correspondence, he was upset that they hadn't published his poems,
Yes.
that they hadn't informed the public that there was a serial killer at large. He was upset about those things. He wanted his information out there.
I think he was personally hurt when they wouldn't give him the fame and glory that he thought he deserved.
I mean, I don't know if he was hurt because
Can he feel anything?
he's a psychopath, so I don't know if he really could feel. But
maybe what he imagined hurt would feel like. There was something
there's
happening.
got to be something to that, because I do believe that he felt some kind of pain from the lack of attention he felt he didn't get from his parents, specifically his mother.
Which I actually have a comment about that a little later.
Okay. So, I mean, you know, I'm not a licensed psychologist, psychiatrist, any of those things. I really wouldn't be able to comment too much on that, but it is very interesting that he's a person who can go and murder people, including children, and have no guilt about it, but then have his feelings hurt that his name is not in the paper.
Maybe he's a fragile boy.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt that at all.
But I do agree, psychopath all the way. He's
And narcissist.
As far as my understanding of psychopath, they can feel some emotions. It's not 100% nothing there. It's just very rare that they have much at all. So maybe in the tiny amount that he could feel, that's all it was.
Well, and I think when you talk about his childhood, we're going to hear a little bit more about that as well.
Dennis Lynn Rader was born in Pittsburgh, Kansas on March 9th, 1945. His mother was a bookkeeper, and his father, a Kansas Gas employee. He would become the oldest of 4 boys. They all grew up in Wichita, Kansas. Their family lived in a modest home at 4815 North Seneca. His father worked long hours. His mother kept herself busy with reading and watching TV. Rader stated that he often felt ignored by his parents and that he felt underappreciated. He got along well with his father, but had a, quote, a little bit of a grudge against his mama. As a child, there was a lack of attachment. They didn't engage much in conversation, and he spent a lot of time at his grandparents'. According to Dr. Ramsland, who is a licensed forensic psychologist, she spent a lot of time interacting with Rader and got to know him and even wrote a book on him. So Rader would cut out magazine clippings of women and then draw ropes and gags on them. He would paste those clippings onto 3x5 index cards and carry them around in his pockets.
That's crazy. Like,
what if he got caught with these
did nobody,
pictures?
are you telling me, so we're talking about like the 50s, early 60s, most likely his mom cleaned his room like every day.
She had to have seen this.
There's no way he didn't have a parent or a friend or a sibling or somebody who's seeing this little kid carry around index cards with women that are like gagged and bound. Like,
I have children. I check their pockets. I find things all the time in their pockets.
You and I had an incident a couple months ago where you found something kind of crazy, which we're not going to specifically talk about what it was, but you and I had to do like this deep dive to figure out, because you weren't going to ignore it. It was like a thing.
Yes, and as a parent, I always make sure my children are healthy, happy, taken care of, their clothes are cleaned, their bodies aren't unhealthy. I do a lot of mothering to my kids. So it's very interesting that either this woman completely ignored these pictures that she would have found cleaning his room and cleaning his clothes, or she didn't do those things. Maybe she didn't care for him at all.
Well, I mean, we're literally not victim blaming. We're just having a discussion on what the possibilities are. But the fact is, as a parent, we do have responsibilities to make sure our children aren't going to harm society. They're not going to harm themselves, that they're mentally safe. Obviously, back in the 50s and 60s, mental health wasn't what it is today, even though today,
that's incredibly true.
It still has a long way to go today. I think we would all agree on that. But in the 50s, I would imagine it was in the 60s, it just probably was completely almost unavailable to people.
I think, honestly, and we still have that stigma about men not going into therapy. And so this is a really big deal even today. And so even if she saw this, she wouldn't go get a therapist. She wouldn't go, maybe she would go seek therapy because that was starting to become a thing around that time. But
that's
she
true.
definitely wouldn't have brought her son, her male child, in to go speak about his emotions to a therapist. There's a giant stigma. Nobody wanted to be labeled weird.
Well, you also made a very valid point as saying that he's a male, because even today there's still a stigma against men having therapists, which is utter bullshit. I mean,
it's awful. Yeah,
that's just the silliest thing I've ever heard.
If men need help, get help.
I mean, men need therapy as much as women do. That's just silly. But I mean, this might be cut, we'll see, but you actually had a situation when you were in, I believe it was 2nd grade, where you drew a photo in class that prompted the school to get involved and look into it.
I don't remember.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I wasn't told right away, and that actually brought a new problem. But yeah, I mean, it's a good thing. It's still a good thing. The school got involved as they should. They didn't do it completely the right way they should have, but they did get involved.
I would want to know if my child drew something a little scary.
I was livid.
If there were images pasted in gags. I mean, oh my God.
I mean, you have to stop and think, what's happening with your child when you see this?
Yeah. I actually have, the next part I'm going to say is an even scarier story than this. And this comes from a childhood acquaintance who knew RADER. So, according to this acquaintance, he got in trouble by a teacher which had humiliated him. So he went to her house and watched her, presumably to do something to her, maybe, or to plan ahead, who knows. So he tied a rope around his waist and had an orgasm while watching her. And that was through the window. So this is the first instance that I was able to find with my research of voyeurism coming into play.
And there is no age or grade associated with any of these instances. Like when I was researching and found out about the 3x5 index cards, I could never find what age he was when this happened. So
I only saw adolescence. So I don't think he was a young 20-something doing this in college. I think this was while he was still a young under, maybe middle school, early high school or something.
Okay, and so this would have started, like you said, his voyeurism. This would have been the beginning of him stalking people and possibly his dive into autoerotic asphyxiation. Yeah. I don't know that he did that in this case, but it does sound like he at least tied himself.
Yeah. So as far as we know, he tied the rope around his waist. So for those who don't know voyeurism, and this is from APA, it's the practice of gaining sexual pleasure from watching others when they are naked or engaged in a sexual activity. And so he would watch her through the window, or at least this one time, he would watch her through the window, and he had an orgasm with that.
So, I mean, he had to at least be pubescent.
Yeah.
Because he wouldn't have been able to do that before puberty. Most likely.
I would think so, yeah. Okay. So further, he had violent sexual fantasies as a child. I found that he masturbated to a violent book his father had and had told Dr. Ramsland that he was sexually aroused from being spanked as a child and when he saw chickens get slaughtered. And so there was a time when his grandparents lived on a farm, and so when he was young, he spent time on that farm. And so this is where we think he got his obsession with barns and the chickens getting slaughtered, potentially at that farm that his grandparents owned.
And he had an obsession with farms and barns and silos.
Yes.
Well through his adulthood. So this is where all this stemmed from.
I think so.
Yes. And I mean, we're only going to learn so much about his childhood, but it would be really nice to be able to do a super deep dive into how this obsession happened as a kid.
I would really love to know, because the thing about serial killers is we think a lot of them were abused in order to become that point, but now there's some new data that's coming out. Not so much data as self-reported data that these serial killers say they weren't sexually assaulted. And that's the problem with self-reporting data, is you almost can never trust what people say about themselves out of embarrassment or anything else.
And all
like
types
that.
of studies. Anytime
all types
there's
of studies.
This is why diet studies are so problematic, is that most of the time it's based on self-reporting, which people don't like to say, and then I ate a whole bag of chips at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. So even crazier or even scarier is that he witnessed his mom get stuck in the sofa. And he talked about this with Dr. Ramsland. Her ring got caught in the sofa somehow. And she was terrified by being stuck, yelling for help. This was a moment that he felt arousal.
And I think he was very young when this happened.
I think even younger than those other stories.
I think so too.
He was aroused when she was yelling for help. And I mean, this was all of his own
self-reporting
admission.
Yeah.
And so that brings me later I will bring up the idea that maybe he even was sexually aroused of his mother, and maybe all of these women took place because maybe he murdered all these women because of his hate for his mother, which who knows.
I mean, this just sounds like an Oedipal complex, and I would imagine that children who feel some sort of sexual attraction toward a parent probably possibly have a bit of self-hate from it.
I think if it continues and you start recognizing that you're, attracted. Oh no, I'm attracted to my dad, my mom. I think there probably would be self-hate because that's completely taboo. So I just want to make it clear that it is completely normal for children between the ages of 9 and 13 to start having sexual fantasies.
Of course.
But I'm curious about when he would get spanked and then he would become aroused. At what age was this starting to come about? I feel like we need more information, and we can't just make up thoughts and facts out of thin air. We don't have enough information.
Exactly.
There.
Let me pivot a little bit to Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer started dissecting animals when he was pubescent, like when he just started puberty. And his dad saw that Dahmer had an interest in dissecting animals, and I think his dad believed it could move into a medical field for him. So his dad helped him learn about it. But at the same time, Jeffrey Dahmer was going through puberty, and somehow these two things melded together, sexuality and internal body parts, which is super disturbing. And so I feel like maybe something happened on this farm that maybe melded violence towards animals with his sexuality that kind of put these things together in a way that's outside of what we would consider normal.
And the interesting thing, to go along with what you're saying, I think the time he spent at the farm was before puberty. And so when RADER would become sexually aroused with the slaughter of chickens, this is him experiencing zoo sadism. Which
never heard that term.
It was coined, I had to look this up. It was coined by Ernest Bornemann. And he said this is when a person experiences sexual arousal from the torture of animals.
If this is you, can just run to get help.
Seek help. Seek help.
Seriously, don't hurt people. Okay, just don't hurt people.
Or animals.
Just don't do it. That's terrible. Don't do it.
If you feel the need. Actually, so I was on Reddit looking into the different definitions of zoo sadism, voyeurism, and pedophilia. And I ran across a thread. A person was bringing up, am I a pedophile if? And so they were trying to anonymously get help for their feelings of needing to assault children. Yeah. They are explaining they are sexually attracted to children. Mm-hmm. They have never hurt a child. They have never sexually interacted with a child. And they know that it's wrong. They know that doing doing any sexual interaction with a child would mean they're a pedophile.
Sure.
So they said, what can I do to stop myself? I am trying every day to make sure I don't do this. This is a person who probably will sexually assault a child at some point in their lives if they don't get the right kind of help. And I think that they are begging to the world, somebody help me. And who knows if they did. This was just a year ago also when they were commenting about this. And you know, police-wise, there's nothing anyone can do about it because there's no...
I mean, thank God. We can't act on people's
the potentials
thoughts.
Of it, yeah.
Exactly. This isn't Minority Report.
Favorite movie.
None of us want to live in that society, okay?
I might.
I'm not saying that we all have pedophilia thoughts, but we all have a thought every once in a while that goes against, like, what's legal.
True.
We've all been, like, had a horrible...
road rage for me.
A horrible incident driving where we're just like, ugh. We don't act on it because we're civil people.
And we know, hey, this is worse than me trying to relieve this feeling inside.
Yeah.
You know? So that's what he was doing, or she, I'm not sure.
And I'm curious, I just want to ask a question with your background in psychopathy. Is that the right word? Psychology.
Psychology. I got a degree in psychology, and I'm studying psychopathy.
And you have a lifetime in psychopathy. Okay. So talking about this Reddit thread that you found, it almost kind of sounds like a form of OCD. And I'm just curious if you know, I know there's medications that treat OCD. Are there medications that also treat someone's maybe thoughts about children? Do you know?
As far as I know, there isn't something that treats someone who is sexually aroused by children. But I do believe there is a medication that they can take to stop their entire sexual arousal at all.
Yeah, well, that's medical castration.
So
pharmaceutical castration, I think, is what it's called.
Yeah, because we're not taking away their parts, but I think there is a medication that a man, I don't think that they have something for women, but I think there's something for men, for men that stop their desire to have sexual relations at all.
Right.
So I think
because it wouldn't just stop the arousal for children, it would just stop the arousal altogether.
Yeah. So it doesn't change the way their brain works, but it does change the way their body works.
And if you actually have information on this, just put it in the comments, please.
We would love that.
We would love to hear anything that we say. If you have more information on it, put it in the comments. You know, we
share a link.
Yeah, we want to start conversations and...
Yeah. And I'm always down to learn some more stuff.
Absolutely.
So additionally to zoosadism, he fantasized about tying women to railroad tracks. And again, guys, this is all in his childhood. He's not in his 20s while I'm discussing this and thinking, he's a teenager, he's preteen, and he's thinking, I would love to tie a woman to the railroad tracks.
I mean, did this kid not go ride bikes and build forts with his friends like I did when I was a little kid?
If he did, it was by railroad tracks.
Jesus.
As a child, he enjoyed torturing and strangling and hanging cats and dogs. He stated that he got aroused by killing cats. Now, even though he killed these other, even though he also killed dogs, he only specifically touched on cats. I'm not really sure what the deal is there, but as far as I know, he also injured dogs. You said, I feel like
it would be harder to murder cats than dogs. Dogs have one way to injure a person. Cats have 5 ways to injure a person.
I'll tell you what, I used to bathe one of my cats because she had such long hair, and I would have to put her in the shower, and she was the most lethal weapon I've ever dealt with. I've shot guns, I've dealt with knives, I've built fires, I've cut down trees.
You fought bees with a knife once.
Machete, thank you. But a cat was the scariest.
Yeah.
According to the Colorado Link Project, you guys can look this up, a person abuses animals because of shock value, unmanaged emotions, or hate towards those animals. So Psychology Today, though, explains that children who abuse animals have either witnessed or experienced abuse themselves. This doesn't just come out of nowhere.
Sure. But would that include just the normal slaughter of an animal on a farm? Like, you know, when you live on a farm, it's not unusual to kill a chicken for dinner.
Yeah, and I think that could have sparked it. I don't think that this is black and white. There's a lot of gray area. And
there's a lot of factors involved.
I mean, if you guys have ever seen a chicken get slaughtered, it's messy, it's scary, it's unhinged. I mean, you've heard the saying, running around like a chicken with your head cut off.
Yeah, that didn't come out of nowhere. There's a meaning behind
slaughter
that.
of chickens, you know, and so it's a very gruesome act. I mean, this definitely could have triggered his need to he could have felt an awakening and need to continue that because it just gave him something that maybe he lacked inside of himself. And additionally, developmentally related motivations for animal abuse may include curiosity, peer pressure, forced abuse, and animal phobias. So that's an interesting thing. Maybe he was scared of cats and dogs. I doubt that's it. But I'm just saying that these are also other things. So if you find that you are abusing animals, look inside yourself. Dennis Rader was also a Boy Scout. And this is where he learned how to tie various knots.
Which we know he used throughout his entire lifetime.
He did. I do not condone the use of the term Indians, but he played cowboys and Indians, and that is a quote from Rader. For me, Native Americans all the way, but that is what he played. And if anyone knows, the cowboys were always the ones who were doing the slaughtering.
That's true.
So,
correct.
When it comes to school, Rader was a below average student.
That's not surprising.
It's not.
But the writings that we've seen from him, that's not surprising.
No, he was a terrible writer. He was introverted and withdrawn. He was described as quiet, polite, and having no sense of humor. One former friend had described him as like a robot with a dead stare. I mean, I can't tell you that I would be friends with somebody that was like that. I would get red flags.
Alarm bells should be going off. But imagine now that you're the mother of this child who is like a robot with a dead stare, has no humor, no sense of humor whatsoever. And then you also find 3x5 index cards with women.
I wish there was education then. It's not like she knew, oh, my son it must be a psychopath.
True. No.
You know, she's thinking, oh, he's a little quirky. He's a little strange. He's a little different.
He's odd.
He's an oddball, you know, but I love him nonetheless, you know, but I mean...
Or I don't love him, because...
Maybe I don't love him at all.
Women were expected to bear children back then, whether they wanted to or not. Mm-hmm. And maybe, we don't know. I'm not trying to say anything bad about his mother. I don't know his mother. There's literally not information out there about his mother. There's very, very little information about her.
Except that she was shocked when the police came to her door. She was completely shocked and in disbelief that he could possibly commit these crimes.
Sure, well...
And we'll go further into that later, but I mean,
we all have the ability of
veil over the eyes.
Exactly. Not accepting something that we just literally can't accept, we can't understand, we don't want to believe to be true.
Yep. So, yeah, I mean, if it were me now, my children are in therapy anyway. I find therapy to be a very growing experience. And so I whether you need help or not, I just think that it's a great thing. Let's all delve into ourselves and see how we can be better human beings. If it were me and at least one of my children were like a robot with a dead stare, I would be on the phone immediately seeking the nearest therapist who will just take my child. So, anyway, I
also wonder if it's possible that he could have been on the autism spectrum.
I think he probably was, and I have a couple of facts later about this.
Okay.
But there was a study that I read, and I'll go into it, but it had to do with serial killers and autism as a combination.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Not to say, of course, that all autistic people are serial killers. That'd be crazy.
We're in no way saying anything like that.
Are all serial killers on the autistic scale? That's something that that's something that this report looked into. So I'll get into that.
Okay.
Another friend said that he was probably the best looking boy in school. And even though he never got the girls, he was too quiet.
And we're going to show
So
photo, but he was actually exceptionally good looking as a teenager. He was an extremely good looking kid. I can't imagine that he probably was the best looking kid in school.
But even crazier, because we've all known those teenage boys. He gave people his full attention. He was very careful in speaking. So he took his time when having conversations, making sure that he never said the wrong thing. And he also made great eye contact and gave people their full attention, which is not something that a normal teenage boy does. Let's face it.
At least
teenage
not now.
boys are messy and distracted. And I mean, even taking away the idea of phones, they're still distracted, whether it's video games or significant others or friends or sports or anything else.
Yes. Back in that time, though, it was a different time. My dad, for example, literally, even though he had sports and my dad was a really good-looking guy and probably had lots of girlfriends, he still spent time, like, working on his penmanship. My dad actually has the most beautiful handwriting I've ever seen in my life.
You know what? On the Christmas card, you're right. It is a beautiful, like, every time he Merry Christmas,
yeah,
and then he lists all the children's names, love Grandma and Grandpa. And yes, he has better penmanship than I do.
Right. So I'm just saying, like, we talk about maybe teenagers in the 60s having their attention go in lots of places, and I don't disagree. They really did probably have their attention in lots of places. But it wasn't like it is now, where we're so distracted by technology and our phones and our iPads and all of that we're literally just bouncing all over the place all the time like we are now. Back then, they literally could slow down. And for Dennis Rader, him slowing down was him focusing on probably how he could hurt people.
And the other thought, though, with him making great attention towards others, I think he was studying how to behave. I think he was learning, because as you'll see later in his adulthood, he did a really great job at hiding, being this chameleon of a human being. And this could have been all of that time when there were definite things that were weird about him as an adult, but no one thought, oh, serial killer, definitely.
No,
he was a great chameleon.
Who even knew what serial killers were in the 60s?
True story.
Serial killers really started getting a lot of attention in the 70s. There were a lot of serial killers in the 70s.
Yeah.
They got a lot of attention then, but back in the 60s, wasn't even so much of a thing.
Exactly. I mean, it's completely true.
But I want to talk about you saying how he thought carefully before speaking, and that you're saying that you think that he really observed people's maybe body language and how they behaved. And that kind of sounds sociopathic to me.
I think that after watching his trial, which we'll get to, I think, in episode 3.
Episode 3, the next episode,
The next episode, when we discuss his trial. But after watching it, I mean, he is... The things he said he did, there's no emotion there. And anytime... The amount of emotion you do actually see is completely fake. I mean, nobody who could commit these crimes would actually experience any amount of emotion. And he was more upset about the judge and everyone having an incorrect piece of information than actually committing the crime itself.
Yes.
So, I mean, yes, I think that he had to teach himself how to be a normal human being who didn't just wander around killing cats and dogs and thinking it was okay. So I wanted to comment on that. His family, as a child, they also attended the Christ Lutheran Church, which we discussed was one of the places he brought his victims as an adult.
Correct.
And then eventually became the president too. So this church is a one solid piece of
yes, it's
his life.
It's a thread throughout his entire life, ending with his capture.
It is, yes.
And even woven into that thread is him bringing one of his victims there for posing in photography. And
it's... I don't know what it is. I don't think it has anything to do with this religion. I'm just going to say that.
No, I don't think so.
But whatever is going on with this church, it resonates so greatly with him that he kept it in his childhood. He moved it into his crimes, and then when he stopped committing serial murders, he became the president and sat there for a little while being the... It's just crazy. So So a couple of interesting things that I found is that he was dropped on his head as an infant and even turned blue. His parents did not seek medical attention for him. And as a teenager, he also had a car accident which resulted in him hitting his head on the windshield, for which he also did not receive medical attention.
And let me add that when his mother was pregnant with him, she had a horseback riding incident where she fell off a horse. Okay, why are we horseback riding when pregnant? That I'm not sure about.
It doesn't
but
seem smart.
It was a different time. I mean,
I feel like maybe she was trying to go into labor, because if I needed to get the baby out, I would go horseback riding. Regarding being dropped on his head as a child and his car accident, most children recover from concussions. However, damage to the developing frontal cortex is dangerous and can result in long-term effects like school-related problems, poor academic performance, and poor decision-making. Further, if he damaged his developing amygdala, then he would likely have trouble understanding emotional responses, including feelings like pleasure, fear, anxiety, and anger. So these are like things we're like, oh, brush it off as a child.
Sure.
But we forget that these brains are developing, and any slight injury to that, if it doesn't heal properly, can maybe we're creating psychopaths.
Well, and we also know from our own personal experience, having one head injury can be catastrophic, but having a second head injury can...
Absolutely. We have a family member.
Can literally affect you for life.
We have a family member who had a traumatic brain injury.
Yes.
And so we've had to learn quite a bit about how this affects
more than we would have liked, for
yes.
sure.
So this was something I found interesting. Government healthcare wasn't established until 1965. So RADER would have been roughly 20 years old. And the reason why I bring up government healthcare is because his mother, as far as we know, mother was a bookkeeper, father was a gas station employee. I can't imagine that those companies
Not gas station. Gas company employee, not gas station.
Gas company employee. His father was a gas company employee. And I can't imagine that they had the greatest of healthcare. And so without those companies offering wonderful healthcare, would they really take their child in for a bump on the head?
What was healthcare in the 40s, 50s, and 60s? I mean...
It's all out of pocket.
I don't imagine... Like, I imagine you had your baby, and then... maybe you went to the doctor for an inoculation, or if they were severely ill or had a severe accident. But if it was something you could tend to at home, you're going to do it.
That's what you did. Yeah. And so that would explain why they thought it was okay to not bring him to the hospital as a child. So the other option, though, aside from... So they either chose not to bring him to see a doctor with those head injuries because of the healthcare. The other option is that maybe they were abusive or neglectful, and they did that negligently. RADER denies being abused, but with how he behaves, I could see that that's not true. I could understand, and I could understand that he wouldn't want to come forward about that, or maybe he doesn't remember.
I mean, listen, let me just add to that real quick. Sometimes admitting that you've been abused means that you are also admitting either your parents, who you love and respect dearly, or your grandparents, or your aunt, or your uncle, or your teacher, these people who you loved very, very deeply also did something horrible to you. And I think that can be a really difficult thing for a person.
It absolutely is.
And I'm sorry.
Many people can't admit to their abuse because of that reason.
Exactly. And I don't necessarily believe a serial killer is being honest. So there's also that.
I can't disagree with that at all. So I looked into, so this is the part where I bring up the autism thought in relation to serial killing. A recent study conducted by the University of Glasgow and published in the Journal of Violent and Aggressive Behavior looked into the neurodevelopmental and psychosocial risk factors in serial killers and mass murderers. So I just want to be clear, any study that I ever bring out in any of our discussions will be the most recent of studies. Now, generally, in order to write any in order to write a paper on it, it needs to be within 20 years. Now,
Okay.
I find that 20 years is still too long ago, because 20 years ago, we weren't even discussing serial killers.
Specifically with mental health, 20 years ago could be, because
yes.
we're just still
it's
learning
constantly
so
developing. So I'm always going to try to find something within the last couple of years. 5 years for me is still too long ago.
much. Okay.
So this one is not that long ago. So out of 239 eligible killers used in the study, they found that 28% had definite, highly probable, or possible autism spectrum disorder. So out of 239, that would be 66 of them.
Okay.
To compare, in the UK, 1 in 100 eligible killers have autism spectrum disorder. So
that's very different.
So it's very different. Out of that 239, 21% had suffered a definite or suspected head injury. So that would be 50 of the 239. Of those discussed, which is 55%, and the way this math works down is that between the autism spectrum disorder and those with head injuries, we are looking at 116 total people.
Okay.
Out of the 239, 116 total people. 55% of that, which is 63 people of the 116, had autism spectrum disorder and a head injury.
Wow.
So they experienced psychosocial stressors such as significant traumatic events during childhood. And that could be violent or sexual abuse, death of a close family member even, which, I mean, so many of us have had death of a family member, a
Yes.
close family member, or even parental divorce.
Which is over 50% of the population.
Yes. So to me, thinking that there's a chance that RADER was on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, I think that this is an easy idea that I can go with. I would say that looking at RADER and with his behaviors, there's a likely chance that he could also be autistic. And again, not saying that people who are autistic, I am also on the spectrum a little bit.
As am I.
And they're finding more and more people are actually on the spectrum. Yes. Is getting wider.
I think it's many more people than we know.
And it doesn't mean that you are going to be a serial killer.
Of course not.
Or a killer at all. But there is a linkage between those who are capable of killing and those who actually follow through with killing.
Yes.
Are somewhere on the spectrum as well.
Yes. We are in no way saying that people with autism are violent. We are 100% not saying that. 100%.
Yeah. But the complete opposite, in fact, that there's just a chance that
yes.
those who are capable of killing might be also on the spectrum.
Sure.
So.
And think about it. You have a person on the spectrum who's growing up, not really getting the help that they need for their being on the spectrum. And now they're dealing with whatever their issues are on their own as an adolescent person.
Exactly. I mean, I can't tell you how... Again, therapy is so huge for me and my family. It has been huge for my person my whole life. I've been to therapy so many times. Mm-hmm. And I needed to learn how to person. There are some things that I needed to talk through and work through and see, like, how do I get around this?
Yes.
Nothing violent to other people, but things that I wanted to be a better human, you know? And I think that if someone could look out for others, maybe a parent, and say, hey, there might be something going on with my child.
Right.
Let me get them some help just to rule it out.
It's so hard to get mental help in this, and at least in the United States.
That's true.
I can't really comment on other countries, but in the United States, it's so difficult.
I actually hear it's very easy in other countries.
I would believe that.
So, yeah. You know, there is a country I read about. I'll have to find it some other time. Maybe next episode I can have that to you. But if you are feeling depressed and need mental health days, that country allows you to take, I think, up to 4 weeks off to get your mental health in order.
Wow.
All for mental health, because they want their employees healthy up here as well.
That's
because
amazing.
They get more productivity out of
You'll have to look
healthier
and
people.
see.
I will.
See what country that is, because that's very interesting.
It'll probably be a long list of many countries.
Those of us who live in America, we know mental health is just not where it should be.
It's not.
It's very sad, actually. It's very, I mean, even when you want mental health, it's so hard to find somebody. Find somebody who takes your insurance in your network.
And then they have to be the right kind of somebody.
And then on top of that, you have to have a fit with the therapist, which is not, I can tell you definitely from my own experience, it can be very difficult.
Yeah.
Dennis Rader graduated from Wichita Heights High School in 1963 and then attended Wesleyan University, receiving mediocre grades. He dropped out and joined the United States Air Force from 1966 to 1970. During this time, he was stationed in Texas, Alabama, and Japan. He left active duty in 1970. During his time in the military, he received the Air Force Good Conduct Medal, Small Arms Expert Marksmanship Ribbon, and the National Defense Service Medal.
Just to touch on these medals you're talking about, the Good Conduct Medal is literally for having good conduct. Wow. Which is crazy to think that he would later become this serial killer. And funnily, expert marksmanship, which he never used for his murders as well.
Well, except with Kevin, right.
True, which he didn't succeed in.
That is true. That's a very good point.
So, for the actual murders he did follow through with, it wasn't based on his gunsmanship.
Sure, but I feel like him having the expert marksmanship ribbon probably gave him this ego,
confidence,
yeah.
If I needed to, I'll just hit him with my.
I'm great with guns. I'll take two.
Did he have a Magnum?
Yes.
So I'll just hit him with my Magnum.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, I've shot one of those guns. Those guns are big and heavy, and they do that's a big. I couldn't even imagine bringing a gun like that to like something like this. It's kind of a crazy gun. It's a big deal.
I can imagine this man. He's so simple-minded that he saw a movie and was like, "I need that gun. It'll be cool when I use it to kill people with."
Well, and I kind of agree with you. I feel like everything in his life is just him imagining how he wants things to go. So he kind of preconceives what he's going to do, how it's going to work out. And so in his mind, he's bringing these guns. Maybe he thought he was going to be like, pew, pew, like bring...
Yeah, if worse comes to worse,
a gun in each hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay. He admitted that during his time in the United States Air Force that he hired sex workers, but none of them had an interest in bondage activities. When I think about this, I kind of feel like he hired them, tried to do bondage stuff, and they freaked out, ran away, and he called them later, and they were like, "No, I'm not coming back. Like, you're crazy."
And nowadays they have there are interviews with ladies of the night and
sex workers.
Yes, I just wasn't sure what we were allowed to say on this channel.
Oh, I just go with sex worker because that's the norm today.
Sure.
You want to start?
Side note, I really like Lady of the Night. So
just because you have a secret wanna-be fetish of being a lady of the night,
I would have really long gloves.
But for you, it's just about the clothes. It's not about.
It is about the clothes. Yeah. Okay. So nowadays there are interviews I've seen with sex workers, and they are giving up tidbits of information from the Johns that they've dealt with. And there are Johns who come in, and John is the general name that is used for those who pay for the sex work. Mm-hmm. And they talk about how some of them are definitely into bondage, abuse, and some of them are willing to do it for the right price. Yeah. Now, but I can see at this time during his military career, these ladies might not have been used to the idea that this is a norm and that people do this healthfully.
Sure.
And had they really let him go all the way through with it, maybe they would have been a victim of his as well.
And let me add to that, with him being stationed in Texas, Alabama, and Japan, I wonder, has anyone done like a back investigation, I guess? A back investigation to see if anything happened in those areas when he was stationed there.
Mm-hmm.
I've always had issues with someone who goes in and has a crime of like 4 murders as their first major crime. Because
that's like gateway stuff, you know?
Yes.
Like earlier, talking about him peering in the window of his teacher, that was a gateway crime to all of this. But there had to have been some things, aside from killing cats and dogs, in between all of this.
I mean, with him admitting that he has hired sex workers in the past, how do we actually know that maybe while in Japan he didn't hire a sex worker and then commit a felony during that time?
And unfortunately, because it's another country, we'll never know.
No.
I mean, we won't know for 2 reasons. One, it's hard to find any information about crimes committed in another country from another country. They don't just put it out there in their newspaper. Hey, Americans, listen to what your guy just did. They don't do that. The other thing is that our military, the United States military, notoriously covers the tracks of their men and women. They are not willing to say, this person we have who's in our military is a bad person, and we're going to shine a light on that. They don't. They cover it up, and then they get discharged dishonorably, which didn't happen to him.
Maybe, in some cases, yeah.
But, you know,
I don't think they do it lightly.
They definitely don't. I've known someone who's been dishonorably discharged for drinking so excessively. And
I was going to say it must have been excessive.
It was excessive. But still, they're not going to let people know this person is committing serial murders to near our base. They're just not going to.
Agreed. There's little information available about his time in the military, including his specialty and if he committed any criminal activity. Dennis Rader returned to Park City, Kansas, a suburb of Wichita, and became employed in the meat department of an IGA grocery store. In 1970, Dennis Rader met Paula Dietz at church. She had just finished her bachelor's degree in accounting, and they quickly fell in love.
And this would be the same church he grew up in and later committed some terrible acts in.
That's correct.
So again, this church just comes back up.
Just a common thread through his whole entire life.
So strange.
Dennis and Paula married on May 22nd, 1971. They went on to have 2 children, Brian and Carrie. 6 weeks after the birth of his first child, Dennis Rader committed his first murders of the Otero family.
Did you say 6 weeks after he had his first child?
Yes.
I've had so many kids. I just have to say, at 6 weeks, I'm still healing.
Yeah.
I'm not all the way up, but times are different. I know my mental health, I know my physical health, and how important that role is for this family to succeed. And then, at this time, women were expected to get back to it. You know, you've been resting a week. You're ready to start. My laundry's not done. My dinner's not cooked. So I can't imagine that she's still recovering outwardly, even though internally she probably is.
Yes.
And he's just off committing one of the most gruesome murders in Kansas history.
Yes. Even in the country's history.
I would be so mad. When you're supposed to be taking care of me.
Yeah, what are you out doing?
You're
should
murdering
be helping
some
me.
people.
You got fired from your job. Can you help me with laundry?
But still, 6 weeks.
Yeah.
6 weeks.
He should be in love. He should be in love with his new little family and wanting to spend time with them.
Playing with the 6-week-old is so fun. It's so sweet.
I mean, helping his wife. Like, he should be doing all of these family things, but no. He's just off killing. He's decimating a family. While he just created his own.
Wow, the irony.
Rader returned to college, attending Butler County Community College, earned an associate's degree in electronics engineering technology in 1973. He then went on to Wichita State University and graduated with a bachelor's of science with a major in the administration of justice.
Wow.
Wow, if I only had like a dime for every serial killer who studied some form of justice or forensics.
You definitely have 2 dimes.
Yeah, that's true.
Little tidbit on another murder that's currently being judged and trialed right now. What is his name?
Brian Kohlberger.
Brian Kohlberger, who studied Dr. Ramsland, who we spoke with, who worked with
She was actually,
BTK.
she was one of his professors.
Yes. So he studied under her and thought, I could kill these students. He got caught right away.
Well, funny thing, which we would probably mention in the loose ends bit, is he actually took I think was a forensics class that focused on one of his crimes.
Kohlberger's own crime.
Not even, no, not Kohlberg,
BTK's
but
crimes.
BTK. It actually focused on one of his crimes.
Ramsland, of course, would focus on his crimes because she was so tight with him.
This wasn't
So tight.
Well, that she wasn't the instructor at this university.
So
She was one of Kohlberger's instructors, but this was obviously decades later. He got a bachelor's administration, 73 or something.
You're saying Rader took a class about his murders.
In one of his classes, yes, somebody came and I think gave a lecture, and it was about one of his murders, and they were studying that to learn probably forensics or something.
I could see he would feel proud and honored.
Man. He was probably
butterflies in the gut.
He was on cloud 9 like all week after that. He was like, yeah, I really made it because now they're teaching me
about me
in university. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Dennis Rader worked for the Coleman Company and then worked for ADT. That's right. He worked for a company that's meant to protect people from the monsters. He worked there from 1974 to 1988, installing security systems, although I've never seen information that he targeted someone whose home he installed a security system. But I would almost guarantee he did. But I haven't seen any information like that yet.
I could see at the very least he would install these systems and see if he liked the feel of this family. Is this a potential future victim of mine? Do I want to kill them? Do I want to add them to, and because he would get so attached to these people and want to keep them as mementos later and always relive this trauma he's put them through. So he's probably going through his head as he's installing these systems.
And yes, he was always stalking. He was always trying to figure out who's his list of people that he may be interested in. Yeah. So yeah, I'm sure that was part of it.
He probably checked many people off whether they lasted that way or not. Maybe he felt it was too sterile and too easy, and so he's like, I don't want this.
That's interesting. In May 1991, Rader became a dog catcher and a compliance officer for Park City. He was considered extremely strict and seemed to especially enjoy harassing single women. A neighbor of his claimed that he killed her dog for no reason.
Go ahead.
There were many complaints filed against him and eventually a lawsuit.
So what's interesting about this to me, this neighbor claiming that he killed the dog for no reason, this woman pled to him, don't take my dog is fine, and he held the dog captive and wouldn't let her get the dog back. And so then he euthanized the dog, basically holding it over her head, you need to contact me, and if you don't pick up this dog in X amount of days, we have to euthanize the dog. And so then he didn't allow her to contact him because he never called her back.
Wow.
So he just, and then the dog was euthanized.
So his ultimate form of terror was, of course, the murders, but then he had lesser forms of terror, like taking people's dogs and harassing women, because every case I read about was a woman. I mean, he also had, I believe, a co-worker that he also endlessly harassed who filed
with the lawsuit.
Yes, and but she also tried to talk to superiors about him to no avail. They never really helped her.
I mean, how many times as a woman have you been in a working situation where you go to the higher ups and talk about harassment and are shut down because they're like, get over it.
Yeah.
This is norm, just ignore them.
Well,
How about we don't ignore them and we start suing the companies?
I mean, unfortunately, I learned as a kid that trying to get somebody to stop harassing you who was a male was fruitless. I learned that as a child, and that was just sad for me, really. In many ways, he would have been considered a normal working father. He went to work. His daughter considered him a good father. He went to church and was even a Boy Scout leader. Little did everybody know at the time who he really was.
I mean, and let's go back to video 1. If you haven't seen it, check it out. He during one of his murders, he was being a scout leader, and used the scouts kind of as a ruse.
So that's not really, we don't really know that yet. We're going to discuss that, I think, in episode 3. Because in episode 1, it's just from the victim's point of view. But there's a lot more details coming in episode 3 of how he committed those crimes, including one where he was at a Boy Scout camp. Mm-hmm. And he left. That was his... so his alibi was being at Boy Scout camp. Although he still worked it out where he could leave Boy Scout camp as a leader and then go do heinous crimes.
Yeah. Which came back around to that same church again. In our next episode, we find out what he was diagnosed with. And we will go further into it. But in a nutshell, narcissism, OCD, and antisocial personality disorders. Mm-hmm. And we have talked a lot about psychopathy today. Now, antisocial personality disorder is commonly used to diagnose someone who is showing textbook signs of psychopathy. Because you can't diagnose someone with saying, "Oh, you're a psychopath." I am textbook psychopath, so I have psychopathy. It's antisocial personality disorder instead. But aside from that, based on what we talked about today, I would, and now I can't diagnose anyone yet. I will hopefully be licensed in the next couple of years when I finish up my master's. But if it were me, I definitely would have diagnosed him with voyeurism, pedophilic disorder, and sadistic personality disorder. I think that he was underdiagnosed and really could have, to have a better understanding of the serial killer, I think we need to have a proper diagnosis. And I think that he was cut short. And we're going to talk about that more, obviously, in episode 3, but yeah. I believe that Dr. Ramsland also states at some point that he was underdiagnosed, that he didn't really he didn't really have a full workup to the point that she would think would be acceptable for what he needed. Yeah, and I don't think that would have changed anything that happened for him trial-wise. Right. But for future science, I think we need to have proper diagnosis, because we will get nowhere as a society if we can't get proper diagnosis there. Agreed. Yeah. All right. High five. Episode 2. Good job. In episode 3, we are going to actually talk about his arrest, everything that led up to his arrest, his trial, and I'm going to touch on different techniques they used, forensic techniques, and evidence, as well as DNA analysis, handwriting, and other forms of technology, and how they used to pull it all together. I think it would be nice to talk about the difference between him being diagnosed with these different mental illnesses and what actually could make a person be diagnosed as, or found guilty by reason of insanity. So I think next time we definitely should touch on why he wasn't found unfit to stand trial. Okay. Why is he not insane, even though he has all of these different diagnoses? I can never say that word. It's so tough for me. So I think that we'll go through the differences in unfit to stand trial for reason of mental deficit or insanity versus his diagnoses for what he was actually diagnosed with, and in addition to what I think and what maybe you think of what he could have been diagnosed with if he had a full workup.
Awesome. Thank you so much for watching this episode. If you actually watched episode 1 and episode 2, please consider subscribing. That way you'll always know when we put out our next episode. Definitely check in next week when we talk about the trial and his guilt and how many years he's going to serve in prison. And we're so grateful that you joined us. Thank you so much.